Dr. Elijah Richardson stares in disbelief at the shredded contents of his medical bag scattered across the airport floor. 6 hours earlier, he'd saved a passenger's life mid-flight. Now, security footage shows a flight attendant deliberately emptying his bag into a trash compactor, laughing with colleagues. On his phone, breaking news alerts explode. Transcontinental Airlines' $520 million insurance policy canceled overnight, stock plummeting 37%. What the flight crew couldn't have known. Dr. Richardson isn't just any doctor. He's the newly appointed medical director for the nation's largest medical malpractice insurer. Would this seemingly routine act of discrimination spark the downfall of an entire corporate empire? Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up for justice and fighting discrimination in all its forms, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more eye-opening stories that expose the truth. Dr. Elijah Richardson settled into his first-class seat on Transcontinental Airlines Flight 2187 from Boston to Los Angeles. After an exhausting week presenting his groundbreaking neurosurgical research at a medical conference, he looked forward to 6 hours of uninterrupted rest. At 38, Elijah had already established himself as one of the nation's top neurosurgeons, with 3 patents for surgical devices and over 100 published papers. The Harvard Medical School alum carried his success with quiet dignity, wearing his usual understated charcoal suit and burgundy tie as he stowed his briefcase. "Excuse me, sir?" Flight attendant Victoria Mercer's voice cut through his thoughts. "I believe you may be in the wrong section." Her plastic smile didn't reach her eyes as they flicked from his face to his boarding pass and back again. "This is 3A. That's my assigned seat," Elijah replied calmly, showing his ticket. Victoria examined it with exaggerated care, just making sure everything's in order. She moved on, but returned 5 minutes later. "Could I see your boarding pass again, sir?" she asked, loud enough that several passengers turned to look. Elijah wordlessly produced it once more. This routine repeated twice more before takeoff, once when asking for his drink preference and again when distributing headphones, each time Victoria's tone suggesting she couldn't quite believe he belonged there. 3 hours into the flight, a commotion erupted 6 rows behind. "Help! Is anyone a doctor? My husband can't move his arm and his speech is slurred," a woman cried out in panic. Elijah immediately unbuckled his seatbelt and made his way toward the distressed couple. "I'm a neurosurgeon. Let me help," he said, approaching the pale, disoriented man whose right side appeared partially paralyzed. "We've already called for medical assistance," Victoria intercepted, blocking his path. "Please return to your seat." "I am medical assistance," Elijah stated firmly. "This man is showing classic stroke symptoms. Every minute counts." Victoria hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside as the man's condition visibly worsened. The passenger, Robert Kelly, a 62-year-old business executive, was now unable to speak, his right side completely limp. "Sir, I'm Dr. Richardson. I need to help you immediately," Elijah said, quickly assessing vital signs. "Does anyone have aspirin?" he called out. Victoria stood frozen, watching as Elijah took command of the situation. With the limited medical kit on board, Elijah administered aspirin to thin Robert's blood, positioned him properly to maximize blood flow to his brain, and monitored his deteriorating vital signs. When Robert began to seize, Elijah performed an emergency airway procedure using a pen and the kit's oxygen supply, stabilizing him until they could land. "We need to divert this flight immediately," Elijah instructed firmly. "This patient requires a comprehensive stroke center within the hour for optimal outcomes." Only after the pilot announced their emergency landing in Denver did Elijah notice Victoria whispering with fellow crew members, casting uncomfortable glances his way. When Catherine Miller, a white nurse from economy class, came forward to assist, the crew's attitude transformed. "Thank you so much for your help," Victoria gushed to Catherine, completely ignoring Elijah's life-saving intervention. "We're so fortunate to have a medical professional on board." After landing, paramedics rushed Robert away. As passengers disembarked, the flight crew surrounded Catherine, celebrating her assistance while Elijah gathered his belongings unacknowledged. "You were amazing," one crew member told Catherine. "Such a blessing you were here." As Elijah walked past the crew toward the exit, he clearly overheard Victoria's whispered words to her colleagues. "I don't care if he has a medical license. He doesn't belong in first class." The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport cast harsh shadows as Dr. Elijah Richardson waited at baggage claim. An hour had passed since the last piece of luggage tumbled onto the conveyor belt, yet his checked medical bag containing over $75,000 of specialized equipment was nowhere to be seen. Exhaustion crept into his bones, but concern over his missing property kept fatigue at bay. "Excuse me." Elijah approached the customer service desk where a representative named Brenda typed disinterestedly. "I've been waiting for my luggage, but it hasn't arrived. It's a black Pelican case with medical equipment marked with medical symbols and my name." Brenda barely looked up. "Fill this out," she said, sliding a form across the counter. "Someone will contact you within 2 weeks. This contains urgent medical equipment. I need to locate it now," Elijah explained, his voice steady despite growing frustration. "Everyone's luggage is important to them, sir," Brenda replied with practiced indifference. "We can offer a $20 meal voucher for your inconvenience." After 15 minutes of getting nowhere, Elijah requested to speak with a supervisor. Marcus Whitfield eventually appeared, his security badge glinting under the fluorescent lighting. "Dr. Richardson would like to review security footage regarding his missing medical bag," Brenda explained, her tone suggesting the request was absurd. "We don't typically allow passengers access to security footage," Marcus began dismissively. "This isn't typical luggage," Elijah countered. "It contains specialized medical equipment with trackable serial numbers. If it's lost or stolen, I need to report it immediately." After several more minutes of persistence, Marcus reluctantly led Elijah to a small monitoring room. 10 minutes, he warned. "That's all I can authorize." The footage revealed something shocking. Victoria Mercer, the same flight attendant who had questioned Elijah's first-class seat, was clearly visible handling his medical bag on the tarmac. She and a ground crew member, whose badge identified him as Tyler Brooks, examined the ID tag, exchanged words, and laughed. Then, with deliberate movements, Victoria opened the bag, emptied its contents into a trash compactor, and high-fived Tyler before walking away. "That's my equipment," Elijah exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "They deliberately destroyed my property." Marcus's expression hardened. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. They were probably following hazardous materials protocol. By selectively targeting my bag and laughing about it? That's not protocol, that's discrimination," Elijah argued, his heart pounding. "I need a copy of this footage immediately." "I'll have to check with legal," Marcus hedged. "In the meantime, I'll file an incident report." When Elijah returned 30 minutes later as instructed, Marcus avoided eye contact. Unfortunately, there was a system error. The footage from that time period has been accidentally deleted during routine maintenance. "Accidentally deleted? In the last half hour?" Elijah questioned incredulously. "These things happen," Marcus replied with feigned regret. "We can offer $500 compensation for your bag, which is our maximum allowance without itemized receipts. Have you ever experienced discrimination that was blatantly denied? Comment number 1 if you've witnessed someone in authority covering up wrongdoing like Marcus did. What would you have done in Elijah's shoes? Like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their race. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate those who fight back. But wait, what happens when a powerful corporation decides to circle the wagons around their employees' racist behavior? You won't believe the wall of resistance Elijah encounters next. The following morning, after a restless night in a Denver hotel, Dr. Elijah Richardson called Transcontinental Airlines' customer service line. 4 transfers and 97 minutes on hold later, he finally reached a representative named Susan Coleman. "Thank you for your patience, Dr. Richardson," Susan began in a rehearsed cadence. "I understand there was an issue with your baggage." "Issue is an understatement," Elijah replied. "Your staff deliberately destroyed $75,000 of medical equipment. I have documentation of the equipment's value and witnessed security footage of your employees targeting my bag. The line went silent for a moment. "I apologize for any inconvenience," Susan continued, as if reading from a script. "As a goodwill gesture, Transcontinental Airlines would like to offer you a $500 voucher for future travel." Elijah's grip tightened on his phone. "This isn't about inconvenience. This is about discrimination and destruction of property. I need to speak with your supervisor immediately." "I'm afraid my supervisor will have the same information I do," Susan replied coolly. "The $500 voucher is quite generous considering our standard compensation caps at $300 for lost luggage." "My equipment wasn't lost," Elijah insisted. "It was deliberately destroyed by your staff after they identified me as the owner. I saw the footage myself." "Without that footage, we only have your word against our employees," Susan countered. "If you continue to make these accusations, I'll need to terminate this call and report a disturbance." "Are you threatening me now?" Elijah asked in disbelief. "Sir, if you're going to become aggressive, I'll need to call security," Susan warned, though Elijah had maintained a measured tone throughout. After 3 more fruitless hours navigating the customer service labyrinth, Elijah finally obtained contact information for Transcontinental's corporate headquarters. The following day, he managed to schedule a video call with Charles Bennett, Vice President of Customer Relations. Bennett, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, projected practiced concern. "Dr. Richardson, first let me apologize for your experience. At Transcontinental, we pride ourselves on excellent service for all passengers." "Mr. Bennett," Elijah began, "your employees questioned my seating assignment repeatedly, despite my first-class ticket, ignored my medical credentials during any emergency, and then deliberately destroyed my property. I need accountability, not platitudes." Bennett's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "These are serious allegations. Unfortunately, without evidence, it becomes difficult to proceed." "There was security footage," Elijah countered, "which our records indicate was corrupted during routine system maintenance," Bennett replied smoothly. "Look, Dr. Richardson, misunderstandings happen in high-stress environments like air travel." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Elijah insisted. Bennett steepled his fingers. "Here's what I can offer. A confidential settlement of $5,000 in exchange for signing our standard non-disclosure agreement. This would resolve the matter efficiently for everyone involved." "You want me to sign away my rights?" "To speak about what happened," Elijah clarified in disbelief. "We prefer to think of it as putting an unfortunate incident behind us," Bennett smiled thinly. "Our legal department can send the documents this afternoon." Elijah consulted with his attorney, Jerome Williams, who reluctantly advised accepting the offer. "Their legal team has 50 lawyers and a history of dragging out cases until plaintiffs run out of money," Jerome explained. $5,000 for equipment they'll claim was only worth a few hundred in depreciated value? Take it and move on. But when Elijah tried to book another flight home 2 days later, the airline's system flagged him as a security risk, requiring additional screening. The gate agent loudly announced this as other passengers stared. Even after clearing the extra security, his new seat assignment had mysteriously changed from first class to a middle seat in the last row, despite his first-class ticket. The message was clear: challenge Transcontinental Airlines, and they would make travel unbearable. This wasn't just about destroyed equipment anymore. It was about systematic intimidation and retaliation. Dr. Elijah Richardson finally returned to his spacious Boston apartment Sunday evening, physically and emotionally drained from his ordeal. Tomorrow would mark his first day as medical director at National Medical Insurance Group, NMIG, one of the country's largest medical malpractice insurers. Despite the challenges of the past week, he found himself looking forward to this new chapter. NMIG's CEO, Margaret Davidson, had personally recruited him after seeing his innovative risk reduction protocols presented at a healthcare conference. "Your approach to identifying systemic problems before they lead to malpractice claims is revolutionary," Margaret had told him during his final interview. "But just as importantly, we need leadership that reflects the diverse healthcare community we serve. Your perspective would be invaluable to our executive team." As Elijah reviewed orientation materials at his kitchen table, a particular client name in NMIG's portfolio caught his attention: Transcontinental Airlines. According to the documentation, NMIG provided the airline with their primary liability, coverage, a massive $520 million policy that represented one of the company's largest accounts. "This can't be coincidence," Elijah murmured, scrolling through the policy details. Transcontinental's annual premium payments to NMIG exceeded $42 million, making them the insurance group's third-largest client overall. The next morning, Elijah entered NMIG's gleaming headquarters to an enthusiastic welcome. Margaret, a tall woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and piercing intelligence, personally introduced him to the executive team during the morning briefing. "Dr. Richardson brings exceptional credentials to our leadership team," she explained to the assembled executives. "His innovative approaches to risk assessment will help strengthen our position in an increasingly competitive market." Most of the executives seemed genuinely welcoming, though Elijah noticed board member Thomas Blackwell's smile never reached his eyes. After the meeting, Elijah was introduced to Benjamin Wells, the company's veteran risk assessment director, who had handled Transcontinental's account for over a decade. "Glad to have fresh eyes on our procedures," Benjamin said warmly as he showed Elijah around the department. When they reached Benjamin's office, he closed the door and lowered his voice. "There's something you should know. I saw the report about your incident with Transcontinental." Elijah tensed. "How did you know about that?" "Part of my job is monitoring client incidents that could affect liability," Benjamin explained. "Your name flagged in our system when their report was filed." He hesitated, then pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "This isn't the first incident. Transcontinental has a pattern of discrimination complaints that troubles me." The folder contained dozens of incidents, most settled quietly with NDAs like the one Elijah had been offered. Flight attendants refusing service to non-white passengers, random security checks targeting specific demographics, crews ignoring medical credentials from minority doctors during emergencies. The pattern was unmistakable. "Why hasn't NMIG addressed this?" Elijah asked, stunned by the volume of complaints. "Risk assessment flagged it 3 times in the last 2 years, Benjamin admitted, "but the account is too valuable. The executive team considers it a necessary business relationship, regardless of the ethical concerns." Later that afternoon, Margaret called Elijah into her office. "I understand Benjamin showed you some of our Transcontinental files," she said without preamble. "Yes," Elijah acknowledged. "The pattern is disturbing." Margaret sighed. "It's complicated. Their business represents nearly 8% of our annual revenue. The board is divided on how to approach the situation." She fixed Elijah with a meaningful look. "Tread carefully here, Elijah. Some board members have personal connections to Transcontinental's leadership. Thomas Blackwell particularly has made it clear that maintaining this relationship is non-negotiable." As Elijah left Margaret's office, his phone buzzed with an email notification. An anonymous sender had forwarded an internal Transcontinental Airlines memo dated 18 months earlier. "Regarding diversity complaints, legal advises minimal documentation. All incidents to be classified as customer service misunderstandings, rather than discrimination claims to avoid pattern recognition by insurers or regulators." The memo was addressed to all senior management, including Charles Bennett and CEO Richard Hampton, with a note that they had implemented a system to identify and preemptively offer settlements to any passengers whose complaints might generate unwanted attention. Transcontinental hadn't just known about these issues. They had systematically worked to conceal them for years. 3 days after Elijah discovered the damning internal memo, airport security footage mysteriously appeared on social media. The grainy video clearly showed Victoria Mercer and Tyler Brooks examining Elijah's medical bag, laughing as they emptied its contents into a trash compactor. Within hours, the hashtag #JusticeForDar was trending nationwide, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Transcontinental Airlines flights. "This is how they treated a doctor who had just saved someone's life," wrote one influential civil rights activist, sharing the footage to her millions of followers. "Imagine how they treat passengers without his credentials." Media outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Life-saving doctor's equipment trashed by airline staff" and "Discrimination at 30,000 feet." Doctor's ordeal exposes airline culture. Public outrage mounted as additional details emerged about how flight attendants had questioned Elijah's first-class seat multiple times despite his valid ticket. Transcontinental Airlines released a hastily prepared statement. "We are aware of a video circulating online showing an incident involving passenger luggage. We take all customer concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough internal investigation. Transcontinental Airlines has a strict non-discrimination policy and is committed to providing excellent service to all passengers, regardless of race, gender, or background. This appears to be an isolated incident, not reflective of our company values." The statement only fueled public anger. Social media users quickly pointed out the hollow corporate language and lack of direct acknowledgement or apology to Dr. Richardson. Calls for boycotts grew louder, and the airline's stock price dropped 7% in a single trading day. By day 5, Transcontinental's CEO Richard Hampton was forced to hold a press conference. Gray-haired and impeccably dressed in a navy suit, Hampton projected practiced concern as cameras flashed. Transcontinental Airlines deeply regrets the unfortunate incident involving Dr. Richardson's property, Hampton read from a prepared statement. "The actions shown in the video do not represent our company's commitment to excellence and respect. We have placed the employees involved on administrative leave pending a comprehensive internal investigation conducted by our legal team." What Hampton didn't mention was that this administrative leave was fully paid, and the internal investigation would be led by the same legal department that had systematically buried discrimination complaints for years. The next day, local news station WBZN featured an exclusive interview with Victoria Mercer. Sitting across from a sympathetic interviewer, Victoria dabbed at tearful eyes with a tissue. "I'm being scapegoated for a simple misunderstanding," she claimed, voice quavering. "That bag was improperly tagged and appeared suspicious. We're trained to prioritize passenger safety above all else. I followed protocol for unattended baggage, and now my 20-year career is being destroyed by social media." When the interviewer gently pointed out that the footage showed her laughing while destroying the property, Victoria became defensive. "You can't hear what was being said. We were discussing something completely unrelated. This is being twisted to fit a narrative that isn't true." As public scrutiny intensified, Elijah began receiving death threats and racist messages. Anonymous accounts flooded his professional profiles with one-star reviews and false claims. "Fraud Doctor" was spray-painted on his apartment door, forcing him to temporarily relocate for safety. Then came Transcontinental's most calculated move yet. Their PR team released a carefully edited version of the original security footage, cutting together fragments that, out of context, made Elijah appear aggressive when speaking with Marcus Whitfield. The edited video conveniently omitted the clear footage of Victoria and Tyler deliberately destroying his property. Additional security footage reveals the full context of the incident, Transcontinental's new statement claimed. "We maintain our commitment to investigating this matter thoroughly while ensuring all perspectives are fairly represented. Have you ever noticed how quickly corporations try to flip the script when they're caught doing something wrong? Comment number 1 if you've seen a company try to make the victim look like the villain, just like Transcontinental did to Dr. Richardson. Should companies be allowed to conduct their own internal investigations when accused of discrimination? Hit that like button if you believe third-party oversight should be mandatory in these cases. Don't forget to subscribe for updates on this shocking story as it unfolds. But wait. What happens when the very institution that hired Dr. Richardson starts feeling the pressure from their powerful client? Will they stand by their new medical director or throw him under the corporate bus? The betrayal that comes next will leave you speechless. Monday morning's executive meeting at National Medical Insurance Group began with unusual tension. Elijah arrived to find the boardroom already full, conversations stopping abruptly as he entered. CEO Margaret Davidson nodded toward an empty chair, her expression giving nothing away. "Before we begin our regular agenda," board member Thomas Blackwell announced, "we need to address the situation involving Dr. Richardson and one of our most valuable clients." His cold gaze fixed on Elijah. "This public spectacle is creating significant concern among our stakeholders." "I didn't release that footage," Elijah clarified calmly. "Nevertheless, Thomas continued. Your decision to escalate a customer service complaint into a media circus threatens a relationship worth over $40 million in annual premiums. The board feels it would be in everyone's best interest if you signed Transcontinental's NDA and issued a statement clarifying that this was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Elijah repeated incredulously. They deliberately destroyed my property after racial profiling. Then their executives actively covered it up. The internal memo proves they've been systematically burying discrimination complaints. Alleged memo, Thomas corrected sharply. From an unverified source. Margaret intervened, her tone diplomatic. Dr. Richardson's position does put us in a delicate situation. However, we hired him for his expertise and integrity. Perhaps we should consider all options before making demands. His position might need to be reconsidered entirely, Thomas replied coldly. A 6-month probationary period is standard after all. The threat hung in the air unmistakably. Throughout the day, colleagues who had warmly welcomed Elijah just a week earlier now avoided eye contact in hallways and canceled one-on-one meetings. By lunchtime, 3 department heads had removed themselves from joint projects with Elijah, citing scheduling conflicts and shifting priorities. In his office that afternoon, Elijah discovered a formal email from Human Resources requesting verification of certain credentials that had already been thoroughly vetted during his hiring process. The request specifically targeted his research publications and hospital privileges, information that had been extensively documented months earlier. When Elijah called Benjamin Wells to ask about the sudden credential review, Benjamin spoke, in a hushed tone. Thomas has been making calls to board members all morning. Word is he's trying to build consensus to terminate your contract under the probationary clause. Why is he so invested in protecting Transcontinental? Elijah asked. That's what I've been trying to figure out, Benjamin replied. I did some digging after our conversation last week. Thomas sits on the board of Globespan Capital, which holds nearly 12% of Transcontinental's stock. He never disclosed this conflict of interest. That evening, Margaret invited Elijah to meet at a small cafe 3 blocks from the office, away from corporate ears. The boardroom is divided, she admitted, stirring her untouched coffee. Half want to stand by you on principle, seeing this as an opportunity to take a moral stand against discrimination. The other half, led by Thomas, view this purely as a business matter and want you gone immediately. And where do you stand? Elijah asked directly. Margaret sighed. I recruited you because I believe in your vision and your character. But I'm also responsible for this company's financial health. Thomas is rallying support, suggesting your activism will cost us our 3 largest accounts if other clients follow Transcontinental's lead. 2 days later, Elijah's company email was flooded with meeting cancellations. His security badge mysteriously stopped working for certain floors, requiring daily reauthorization. The IT department reported technical issues with his account, access that somehow only affected his login credentials. Then came the most disturbing development yet. An anonymous email arrived in Elijah's personal inbox containing a screenshot of internal NMIG communications. Thomas Blackwell had explicitly directed the HR department to find any discrepancies in Richardson's application or credentials, no matter how minor, and to prioritize this review above all other matters. Another screenshot showed communication between Thomas and Richard Hampton, Transcontinental's CEO, discussing the mutual benefits of resolving the Richardson situation quickly and quietly. The final line chilled Elijah. Once confirmed terminated, we'll process the policy renewal immediately with the previously discussed favorable terms. The whistleblower's message was brief. Not everyone at NMIG is willing to sacrifice integrity for profit. Some of us still believe doing the right thing matters. Dr. Elijah Richardson sat across from civil rights attorney Zoe Washington in her downtown Boston office, sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating the various awards and recognitions adorning her walls. At 45, Zoe had built a reputation as a fearless advocate, winning landmark discrimination cases against seemingly untouchable corporations. They're trying to bury you from multiple angles, she observed after reviewing his documentation. Transcontinental wants To silence you while your own company seems determined to discredit you. Classic corporate containment strategy. Can we fight them both? Elijah asked. Zoe's expression was serious but determined. It won't be easy. Transcontinental has a legal team of over 50 attorneys and almost unlimited resources. NMIG is more vulnerable, but we'd need to tread carefully with your employment contract. The good news? That leaked memo is a smoking gun if we can authenticate it. They spent hours developing a comprehensive strategy. Rather than wait for termination, they would go on the offensive with a multi-pronged approach. A discrimination lawsuit against Transcontinental Airlines, whistleblower protection for Elijah, and careful documentation of NMIG's retaliatory actions. When the discrimination lawsuit was filed the following week, Transcontinental's response was swift and aggressive. Their attorneys filed immediate motions to dismiss, claiming lack of evidence and arguing that airline staff had followed standard protocols for suspicious baggage. What followed was a masterclass in coordinated testimony. Victoria Mercer, Tyler Brooks, and 3 other crew members provided nearly identical accounts, claiming Elijah had been confrontational, aggressive, and threatening throughout the flight and afterward. Their statements portrayed him as a disgruntled passenger who had exaggerated a routine baggage inspection into a discrimination claim for financial gain. Marcus Whitfield submitted an affidavit stating the original security footage had been corrupted during routine system maintenance with no possibility of recovery. The airline's technical experts produced elaborate documentation of a system-wide storage failure that conveniently affected only the original unedited footage. Most troubling of all, Judge Gregory Williams was assigned to the case, a former partner at the same law firm that had represented Transcontinental Airlines for 20 years. Despite Zoe's motion requesting his recusal based on this clear conflict of interest, Judge Williams refused to step aside, claiming his past association would not affect his impartiality. This is a blatant attempt to damage a respected airline's reputation through unsubstantiated claims, Judge Williams declared during the preliminary hearing. This court will not allow its resources to be wasted on frivolous accusations. When Zoe attempted to enter the leaked internal memo as evidence, Judge Williams immediately barred it, ruling it potentially obtained through illegal means and therefore inadmissible. His judicial calendar somehow found room to fast-track Transcontinental's motion to dismiss, scheduling it for the following week rather than the standard months-long wait. Transcontinental didn't stop at legal defenses. They launched a coordinated counterattack, filing lawsuits against Elijah for defamation, business interference, and breach of the verbal settlement agreement Charles Bennett claimed they had reached. Each new case required responses, hearings, and depleted Elijah's financial resources while stretching Zoe's capacity to respond effectively. Meanwhile, seemingly independent articles began appearing in medical journals questioning Elijah's research methodology and clinical judgment. One publication ran a piece titled, "When Activism Overshadows Medical Ethics," strongly implying that Elijah's discrimination claims were a calculated publicity stunt to advance a personal agenda. The pressure mounted as colleagues from Elijah's past received anonymous calls asking leading questions about his professional conduct. Former patients were contacted with suggestive inquiries about their satisfaction with his care. Each action individually seemed minor, but together they formed a clear pattern of character assassination. Despite overwhelming evidence of coordination between the airline's legal team and NMIG board member Thomas Blackwell, Judge Williams appeared determined to dismiss the case. During the critical hearing on Transcontinental's motion to dismiss, he repeatedly interrupted Zoe's arguments while giving the airline's attorneys unlimited time to present their case. The plaintiff has failed to provide compelling evidence of discriminatory intent, Judge Williams concluded after just 4 hours of arguments. This court finds no basis to proceed with this matter. Case dismissed. The courtroom fell silent as Elijah absorbed the devastating blow. Transcontinental's attorneys exchanged satisfied glances, already gathering their materials to leave. The message was clear. The system was aligned against him, from the airline to the insurance company to the courts themselves. But Zoe Washington wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we have prepared an immediate appeal and will be requesting an emergency stay," she announced firmly. "Additionally, We've filed a judicial conduct complaint regarding your undisclosed conflicts of interest in this matter." Judge Williams's face reddened with anger. "You're treading on dangerous ground, counselor." "So are you, Your Honor," Zoe replied evenly. "So are you." Despite the courtroom setback, Dr. Elijah Richardson arrived at NMIG headquarters the next morning with renewed purpose. If the legal system wouldn't hold Transcontinental accountable, perhaps there was another approach through his position as medical director. Rather than focusing solely on his personal discrimination case, he would leverage his professional authority to examine the airline's entire risk profile. "I'm initiating a comprehensive review of Transcontinental Airlines' insurance policy," he announced during the morning executive meeting, placing a formal request document on the conference table. The room fell silent. Thomas Blackwell's face contorted with barely contained rage. "That's completely unnecessary," Thomas objected. "Their policy was thoroughly reviewed just 6 months ago." "By whom?" Elijah challenged. "The documentation shows only a cursory assessment that ignored dozens of settled discrimination claims. As medical director, it's my responsibility to accurately evaluate all risks associated with our major policies." Margaret Davidson studied both men before, responding carefully. "Dr. Richardson does have the authority to initiate specialized reviews within his domain. If he believes there are unaddressed medical or liability risks, we should take that seriously." Thomas leaned forward, voice low and threatening. "This is a transparent attempt at retaliation for a personal grievance. The board won't stand for, Then the board can vote to stop me," Elijah replied calmly. "Until then, I'll be doing the job I was hired to do." Returning to his office, Elijah found Benjamin Wells waiting. "That was either incredibly brave or completely insane," Benjamin remarked. "Probably both." "I need your help," Elijah said. "You've managed their account for years. You know where the bodies are buried." Benjamin hesitated. "This could cost us both our careers." "Staying silent already cost me my medical equipment, my reputation, and nearly my dignity," Elijah responded. "What else should I sacrifice to protect corporate profits?" Over the next week, Elijah and Benjamin worked methodically, reviewing every discrimination complaint, safety violation, and settled claim against Transcontinental Airlines for the past decade. Benjamin secretly provided access to restricted risk assessment data, showing the airline had systematically concealed incidents that should have triggered policy reviews or premium increases. "Look at this pattern," Elijah pointed out, spreading documents across his desk. 27 discrimination complaints settled with NDAs in the last 18 months alone. 14 involved medical professionals of color whose credentials were questioned during emergencies. 3 resulted in patient care delays that could have been catastrophic. "And here," Benjamin added, pulling up internal correspondence, "our own analysts flagged the pattern 3 separate times, but the warnings were buried by upper management." Together, they compiled a comprehensive report documenting how Transcontinental's discriminatory practices created significant liability risks beyond Elijah's personal case. The pattern suggested not isolated incidents, but a corporate culture that endangered passengers and created massive potential exposure for NMIG. When Elijah presented his findings to the insurance board, the room divided clearly. Half the executives appeared genuinely disturbed by the evidence, while others, led by Thomas, dismissed the report as cherry-picked data twisted to support a personal vendetta. "This isn't about me," Elijah insisted. "This is about an insurance risk we're knowingly ignoring. If Transcontinental faces a class action discrimination lawsuit, which seems increasingly likely, our exposure could exceed $1 billion. Their current policy would leave us holding that entire liability." After heated debate, the board narrowly voted to place Transcontinental's policy under formal review, a significant step that would require the airline to address the identified issues or face potential non-renewal. Richard Hampton's response was immediate and furious. Within hours of the board's decision, he called Margaret directly, his threats captured on her office recording system. "If you don't reverse this decision immediately, we'll take our business to Universal Insurance," Hampton threatened. "You're talking about $42 million in annual premiums walking out the door because you won't control your activist employee." What Hampton couldn't know was that Elijah's attorney, Zoe Washington, had been building relationships with other discrimination victims, creating a network of witnesses willing to break their NDAs if given legal protection. More importantly, she had uncovered financial transactions between Thomas Blackwell and transcontinental executives, irregular payments disguised as consulting fees that precisely corresponded with policy renewal dates. The evidence was unmistakable. Thomas had been accepting bribes to ensure favorable policy terms regardless of the airline's actual risk profile. When confronted with this evidence by Margaret and the board's ethics committee, Thomas's carefully constructed facade crumbled. "You don't understand the pressures of this business," he stammered. "Everyone does this. It's just relationship management." "We call it bribery," Margaret corrected coldly. "And no, everyone does not do this." Have you ever witnessed someone finally facing consequences after years of corruption? Comment number 1. If you believe corporations need stronger oversight to prevent the kind of bribery Thomas engaged in, should whistleblowers like Benjamin be better protected when they expose wrongdoing? Hit that like button if you think we need stronger laws to shield those who speak truth to power. Don't forget to subscribe to see how this explosive story concludes. But wait. What happens when Dr. Richardson's personal battle suddenly becomes a national conversation about discrimination? The public reckoning that follows will stun everyone involved. As news of Thomas Blackwell's unethical relationship with Transcontinental Airlines broke, Dr. Elijah Richardson's personal struggle transformed into a national conversation about systemic discrimination. Major news outlets ran investigative pieces examining how corporations insulated themselves from accountability through NDAs, internal investigations, and strategic legal maneuvers. The dam had broken. Across the country, former transcontinental passengers began sharing their own experiences of discrimination. Melissa Chen, an oncologist from Seattle, described being repeatedly questioned about her medical credentials during an in-flight emergency, despite showing her hospital ID. James Washington, a tech executive from Atlanta, recounted being moved from first class to economy after a flight attendant insisted his ticket must have been mistakenly upgraded. Most significantly, former transcontinental employee Tanya Rodriguez came forward with internal training materials instructing staff to conduct additional verification for passengers who don't match typical customer profiles, thinly veiled code for racial profiling. Tanya had been fired after questioning these practices, silenced by an NDA that Zoe Washington now helped her challenge. "This wasn't just a few bad apples," Tanya explained in a televised interview. "This was systematic. We were trained to question certain passengers more aggressively, to scrutinize their tickets and IDs in ways we never did with others." The American Medical Association, National Bar Association, and other professional organizations issued statements supporting Dr. Richardson and condemning the treatment he'd received. Medical schools nationwide incorporated his case into ethics discussions about discrimination in healthcare settings and professionals' responsibilities when witnessing bias. Congressional hearings were announced to examine discrimination in the airline industry, with Dr. Richardson invited to testify about his experience. The Department of Transportation launched a formal investigation into Transcontinental's practices, requesting years of customer complaint data and internal training materials. The airline's initial strategy of denial crumbled as more evidence emerged. Victoria Mercer and 3 other flight attendants were placed on unpaid suspension pending investigation, a stark contrast to their previous paid leave. Ground crew member Tyler Brooks was terminated outright after additional footage showed him damaging luggage belonging to other minority passengers. CEO Richard Hampton, once untouchable, found himself facing increasingly hostile questions from journalists and shareholders alike. During a disastrous press conference intended to announce new diversity initiatives, Hampton lost his composure when asked about his knowledge of the internal memo documenting the company's discrimination cover-up. "These accusations are being blown completely out of proportion," he snapped, visibly agitated. "One mishandled bag doesn't constitute systematic racism. The real problem here is how social media allows isolated incidents to damage reputable companies." His outburst was broadcast nationwide, further damaging Transcontinental's already tarnished reputation. The airline's stock price plummeted and, Additional 22% in the following week as major institutional investors began divesting. At NMIG, CEO Margaret Davidson faced her own reckoning. Shareholders demanded explanations for why Thomas Blackwell's conflict of interest had gone undetected for so long, and why the company had initially pressured Dr. Richardson to remain silent, rather than addressing the discrimination he'd experienced. "We failed to live up to our own ethical standards," Margaret acknowledged during an emergency board meeting. "In our focus on profit margins, we lost sight of the values this company was founded upon. That changes today." Federal investigators descended on Transcontinental Airlines headquarters, armed with subpoenas for communications, training materials, and complaint records dating back 7 years. What they uncovered shocked even the most cynical observers. A sophisticated system designed to identify, suppress, and discredit discrimination complaints before they could generate public attention or legal liability. The investigation revealed an internal classification system that flagged certain passengers as PR risks based on their professional credentials, social media following, or likelihood of pursuing complaints. For these passengers, the airline maintained special protocols for offering quick settlements with strict confidentiality provisions. Victoria Mercer's personnel file contained multiple previous incidents involving passengers of color, each dismissed after cursory investigations by the same supervisors who had protected her after the incident with Dr. Richardson. Her employment history showed rapid promotions despite these complaints, suggesting her behavior had been tacitly rewarded rather than corrected. Thomas Blackwell's financial entanglement with Transcontinental Airlines proved even deeper than initially suspected. Beyond the consulting fees, investigators discovered offshore accounts receiving regular payments coinciding with policy renewals. These accounts connected to shell companies partially owned by Thomas's family members, creating plausible deniability while channeling millions of dollars from airline executives to the man responsible for their insurance oversight. Business publications ran detailed exposés of the financial scandal, with headlines like "The Price of Silence," "How Transcontinental Bought Insurance Protection," and "Conflict of Interest, the billion-dollar insurance scheme." NMIG's stock temporarily suffered as investors worried about additional regulatory consequences, but stabilized after Margaret Davidson announced comprehensive ethics reforms and full cooperation with investigators. Benjamin Wells emerged as a key witness, revealing years of suppressed evidence about the airline's discriminatory culture. His meticulous record-keeping proved invaluable to investigators, demonstrating how legitimate safety concerns had been repeatedly raised and ignored when they conflicted with the company's financial interests. "I documented everything because I knew someday someone would have the courage to address it," Benjamin explained during his testimony. "I just never had the courage myself until Dr. Richardson showed me what integrity looks like under pressure." Facing mounting legal exposure and potential criminal charges, Victoria Mercer made a calculated decision to cooperate with investigators. In exchange for partial immunity, she provided detailed testimony about the airline's internal practices, including specifics about which executives had directed the destruction of Dr. Richardson's property and subsequent cover-up. "We were told certain passengers needed to be reminded of their place," Victoria testified, avoiding eye contact with her former colleagues. "Management made it clear that first class had a particular image to maintain, and we understood exactly what that meant." As Victoria's testimony became public, Charles Bennett resigned from his position as Vice President of Customer Relations, hoping to distance himself from the growing scandal. His departure triggered a cascade of resignations throughout Transcontinental's executive team as individuals scrambled to avoid association with the company's discriminatory practices. With his inner circle disintegrating, CEO Richard Hampton grew increasingly isolated and erratic. During a video conference with remaining executives, unaware his microphone remained active during a break, Hampton was recorded making explicit, racist remarks about Dr. Richardson and other minority professionals who had filed complaints. "Who do these people think they are?" Hampton snarled, voice dripping with contempt. "Richardson should have stayed in his lane instead of trying to play the race card. Now look at this mess." The recording leaked within hours, spreading across social media and news outlets like wildfire. By morning, Transcontinental's board of directors had called an emergency session, and by afternoon, Richard Hampton had been removed as CEO, escorted from the building by security while protesters gathered outside corporate headquarters. 1 year after the airport incident that sparked the entire chain of events, Dr. Elijah Richardson stood before NMIG's assembled employees as Margaret Davidson made a historic announcement. "It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Richardson as our new Executive Vice President of Corporate Accountability and Ethics," Margaret declared to enthusiastic applause. His courage in standing firm against discrimination, even when it would have been easier to remain silent, embodies the values we commit to upholding moving forward. Elijah's new division had unprecedented authority to review client policies and practices, with explicit board-level support for addressing discrimination and other ethical concerns, regardless of a client's financial importance. His first initiative required all insurance clients to implement anti-discrimination training and transparent complaint procedures as conditions for coverage. The ripple effects extended throughout the insurance industry. Major competitors quickly adopted similar requirements. Recognizing that preventing discrimination claims created more stable risk profiles than settling them quietly, corporate clients initially resistant to these new standards changed course after watching Transcontinental's implosion, understanding that the financial consequences of unaddressed discrimination far outweighed the costs of meaningful reform. Margaret publicly acknowledged her own initial hesitation to support Elijah. "I made the mistake many leaders make, believing we could address discrimination gradually without disrupting business relationships," she admitted during an industry conference. Dr. Richardson taught us that incremental approaches to injustice simply preserve the status quo. Real change requires courage and sometimes sacrifice. Transcontinental Airlines, under completely new management following a shareholder revolt, struggled to rebuild its reputation. The airline's new CEO, Andrea Ramirez, implemented comprehensive reforms including third-party oversight of all discrimination complaints, transparent reporting of incidents, and elimination of NDAs for discrimination settlements. "We're committed to becoming the industry leader in equitable treatment," Andrea announced during her first press conference. "That journey begins with acknowledging our failures and taking concrete steps to ensure they never happen again." Perhaps, most surprisingly, Victoria Mercer contacted Elijah directly, requesting a meeting. After initial hesitation, he agreed to see her at a neutral location with Zoe Washington present. "What happened to you was inexcusable, and I was an active participant," Victoria acknowledged, maintaining steady eye contact despite visible discomfort. "I've spent months in therapy understanding the biases that influenced my behavior. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm working with airline diversity programs now, using my experience as a cautionary tale." Elijah listened thoughtfully before responding. "Real change happens when people, like you, acknowledge harm and work to prevent it from happening to others. That's more valuable than any apology." Medical associations nationwide adopted new protocols for supporting healthcare workers facing discrimination, including legal resources and advocacy programs. The American Medical Association cited Dr. Richardson's case when establishing guidelines for hospitals and airlines regarding credential verification during emergencies, specifically addressing racial and gender bias in professional recognition. Federal regulators implemented new oversight requirements for airlines, mandating regular audits of discrimination complaints and prohibiting internal investigations of bias claims without independent review. Congressional hearings resulted in legislation strengthening whistleblower protections for employees reporting discrimination within their organizations. Despite numerous lucrative offers from corporations seeking to demonstrate their commitment to diversity, Elijah remained at NMIG, establishing a mentorship program for young professionals of color entering corporate environments. The program provided not only career guidance but also strategies for recognizing and addressing systemic discrimination. "This was never just about one incident or one airline," Elijah explained when asked about his decision. "The real challenge is changing systems that allow discrimination to flourish unchecked. That's where I can make the most difference." 5 years after his fateful flight, Dr. Elijah Richardson stood at the podium of the National Corporate Ethics Conference, surveying the audience of executives, regulators, and advocates gathered to discuss building more equitable business practices. As the keynote speaker, he had been asked to reflect on the transformation his experience had sparked across multiple industries. What began with a destroyed medical bag revealed something far more valuable than equipment, Elijah began. It exposed the intricate ways discrimination becomes embedded in corporate structures, not just through individual bias, but through systems designed to protect profits rather than people. The conference hall remained silent as he continued. 5 years ago, I faced a choice many of you might recognize. Accept injustice in exchange for personal comfort, or risk everything to challenge a broken system. What I discovered is that there is remarkable power in refusing to participate in your own marginalization. On the main screen behind him, data visualizations illustrated the dramatic changes across the airline and insurance industries. Discrimination, complaints down 67%, whistleblower reports up 82%, and diverse leadership increased by 45%. Most significantly, companies with strong anti-discrimination programs showed substantially higher long-term profitability and stability than those maintaining the status quo. Today, I'm announcing the launch of our comprehensive Corporate Accountability Index, Elijah revealed, presenting a sophisticated data platform. This system uses insurance data, anonymized complaint patterns, and leadership metrics to identify set or discrimination risks before they become crises. It gives companies real-time feedback on their ethical performance while providing investors with transparent information about corporate culture. The platform, developed in partnership with NMIG's data science team and diversity experts from major universities, represented the culmination of Elijah's vision, transforming subjective conversations about discrimination into objective, measurable metrics that corporations could no longer ignore or dismiss. Former Transcontinental CEO Richard Hampton, who had initially fought against every reform, now ran a consulting firm helping companies navigate discrimination claims. A remarkable transformation for a man once caught making racist remarks. His new business thrived precisely because companies had witnessed the devastating consequences of following his previous approach. Victoria Mercer had become a respected speaker on corporate culture change, her story serving as a powerful reminder that systems encouraging bias could transform ordinary employees into instruments of discrimination. Her candor about her own failures had earned grudging respect, even from those initially skeptical of her redemption narrative. Thomas Blackwell had faced legal consequences for his financial misconduct, ultimately serving 18 months in federal prison for fraud and corruption. His case became a cautionary tale taught in business schools nationwide about the personal and professional costs of ethical failures. NMIG, under Margaret Davidson's continued leadership, had grown to become the industry leader not despite its ethical stance but because of it. The company's commitment to accountability attracted clients seeking to mitigate discrimination-related risks, creating a virtuous cycle where ethical behavior drove financial success. As Elijah concluded his address, he shared the personal insight that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his journey. When I stood alone in that airport watching the security footage of my property being destroyed, I felt powerless. But I discovered that speaking truth, even when powerful interests are invested in silence, creates ripples that eventually become waves. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes as attendees absorbed the profound impact of one person's refusal to accept injustice. What had begun as a personal affront had transformed into an industry-wide reckoning with discrimination, creating lasting change that extended far beyond one doctor or one airline. In the audience, a young medical resident of color watched attentively, unconsciously touching the ID badge clipped to her white coat. Tomorrow she would board a flight to present her research at a conference, carrying with her not just medical knowledge, but the assurance that her credentials would be respected, not because discrimination had been eliminated entirely, but because one person had stood firm against it, creating space for those who would follow. When asked later about his legacy, Dr. Elijah Richardson offered a characteristically thoughtful response. The most important change isn't visible in corporate policies or legal reforms, though those matter greatly. It's the subtle shift in what people believe is possible. Every person who witnesses someone successfully challenging discrimination becomes more likely to recognize and resist it themselves. That's how systems ultimately transform, one courageous decision at a time. The journey of Dr. Elijah Richardson teaches us several profound lessons about confronting discrimination in modern America. First, it demonstrates how individual courage can catalyze systemic change. By refusing to accept an unjust settlement and standing firm against powerful institutions, one person created ripples that transformed entire industries. Second, the story reveals how discrimination often operates through sophisticated corporate mechanisms designed to silence victims and preserve profitable but problematic practices. These systems succeed precisely because they isolate individuals and make challenging them seem impossible. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative highlights the crucial difference between performative diversity initiatives and genuine accountability. Transcontinental airlines had anti-discrimination policies on paper, but their actual practices revealed their true priorities. Real change required exposing the gap between stated values and concrete actions. The story also underscores how business and ethics need not be opposing forces. NMIG ultimately thrived, not despite taking an ethical stand, but because of it. Companies that address discrimination proactively create more stable, innovative environments while avoiding costly legal and reputational damage. Finally, Dr. Richardson's experience reminds us that transformation happens in stages: individual recognition, collective awareness, institutional accountability, and ultimately, cultural change. Each person who witnesses successful resistance to discrimination becomes more likely to recognize and challenge it themselves, creating powerful momentum for lasting progress. What moment in Dr. Richardson's journey resonated most deeply with you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination that was dismissed as a misunderstanding? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. If this story moved you or made you think differently about how discrimination operates in professional settings, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores important social issues through powerful narratives. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that standing up against injustice, though difficult, is how we collectively create a more equitable world. Thank you for watching, and remember, courage in the face of injustice is never wasted.